Hello and welcome to the 3D Blu-ray Bunker. This is where I look exclusively at films on 3D Blu-ray, not to do a movie review, but to focus almost entirely on the 3D, with just a short word at the end about the film itself. And this time I'm looking at Friday the 13th, Part 3. It's got an aspect ratio of 2.39 to 1, and obviously being originally released years before the digital era, it was natively shot in 3D. I think this was the first of the three 1980s Part 3 in 3D films, and in common with that wave of 3D movies, this is unrestrained, full-fat 3D right from the opening credits. And those credits are the type that come a good way out of the screen, and then keep on coming, stretching to the limit of what you can get away with, and well within touching distance. And it's not just the title that comes out, but then the following maybe 20 further actor and production credits do the same thing. And I think it could be argued that it starts to get a little bit tedious maybe by the time Steve Miner's director's credit finally hits us in the face. And this was a tiny bit controversial when it was first belatedly released on 3D Blu-ray in 2020, as the initial pressings had the convergence point of the cast and crew credits set in the wrong place. So whilst they had their full depth effect, they were all in positive parallax, so behind the screen rather than in front of it. I'm always all for releases being done correctly as per original intent. But I can't help feeling that Shout Factory was inadvertently onto something with this mistake, and maybe it would have been more effective for those production credits to stretch deep beyond the screen, and then to finally blast the title out of the screen. Anyway, the disc was reissued with this credit sequence back as it was originally designed, and as it is, it does set the scene for the style of 3D that's to follow. There is a brief pre-credit prologue sequence using old 2D footage, and when that switches into 3D with this fairly innocuous looking shot, which in 2D doesn't look like it's got much to offer across 3D space, it's instantly apparent that an extra dimension has been added, and that this isn't the frequent modern style of safe and gentle 3D, but this is happy to dial up the effect nicely beyond natural human stereo vision. So I think the 3D in this film is probably best known for some of its more outrageous shots, and we'll have a look at some of those in a moment, but I do think that it definitely deserves a lot of credit for its excellent 3D production design and plenty of atmospherically effective uses of 3D. Quickly first though on maybe the main negative, and that's a few shots where there's quite significant vertical misalignment, which unfortunately wasn't sorted out before this disc was released or re-released. There's only a few views like this where you can feel your eyes twisting a bit, so it's not a big problem, just a tiny bit sad that some extra effort wasn't put into making this film look its absolute best. I quite like this view because the TV's image is placed a good way behind the screen, and I think it was always difficult to film cathode ray tube TVs because of the camera's clash of frame rates, so they often had to fake it, and it's amusing to see them push the image a good way behind where it ought to be. So if you're under about 20 and have never seen one, this isn't what the image on a CRT TV looked like. Anyway, on that great design though, this interior shot is designed in a way to stretch a good long way into the screen, and they've clearly gone to the effort of staging sets to keep the Z-axis filled. And when there's someone in the foreground, they're often put into negative parallax, so him and the rabbit are very clearly on our side of the screen. It's the same with this view. They've dressed the set to cover 3D space, and it's not just the mug and stuff on the table that's in front of the screen, but pretty much from the back of the sofa towards the camera is also. And it does feel like most of the film has been carefully set up to make the most of 3D space, with the foreground, middle ground and background usually being full of stuff. There's some fantastic views amongst this washing, which I assume was chosen because of its suitability as a solid 3D view, and maybe also because washing lines need poles, and I'll come back to that. Sometimes the design is done in a way that kind of draws attention to itself in a mild sort of way, like who gets out of the shower without turning off the water? Well, an obliging girl in a 3D film might, because that would leave the water to occupy nicely distinct space of its own, with her in the background a good way beyond. Quite a bit of the film takes place in a barn, and this is a great location for 3D, with its slatted walls, all of the beams going across 3D space, and there's also ropes dangling and used to pull things up, and it really does look like a lot of thought and care was put into the 3D design of the film. And of course, it's all photographed to make the most of these views in 3D, 3D. Like, for example, even in this fairly ordinary sequence, there's not only the fence in the foreground, but they've managed to get some overhanging branches at the top of the screen, which all helps to frame the view nicely. And as well as all of the film's very good 3D composition, I think there's a lot of really atmospheric 3D being used too. There's a view that we see several times of somebody on the other side of a window. It's not just nice 3D framing, but it also sometimes adds to the feeling of unease about who's on the other side of the glass in the room with us. And these are maybe fairly standard views in a 2D film, but it feels to me like a much stronger sense of space and danger is conveyed when you see it in 3D. And it works the other way around too, so sometimes we're in a room with someone we presumably want to be safe, but there's a menace beyond the window lurking somewhere, and again, there's a huge benefit of seeing this in 3D as it absolutely emphasises the gloom in the distance beyond the window. One of the views I always love in 3D films is when the camera is low down on a flat plane, like on the lake here, and the surface stretches back deep into the screen. I think there's a lot of different opinions, all valid, on what makes for good 3D, but it's simple views like this that I often find the nicest to look at. Another use of 3D that I love is when there's a vast number of things in the frame all occupying different 3D space. And maybe the closest that we get to that in this film is an ultra brief shot of a load of books falling towards the camera. Another really atmospheric 3D view is having a character coming towards us from one very distinct 3D space into another, and when there's maybe danger awaiting at the top of the ladder, this is possibly my favourite shot in the film. It's deep and strong 3D, where the stereo helps to dial up the tension. So I reckon there's an awful lot of excellent 3D going on in this film. A lot of it's thoughtful, clever, and even subtle sometimes, but none of that is really what it's generally remembered for. Like I said at the top, those opening credits were paving the way and limbering up your eyes for the style of 3D that the film was going to be full of, and it's pretty flamboyant stuff. So when he's thrusting this pole towards the camera, he's not going to give up when it's protruding halfway into your room, but he's going to keep on going until he's pushed it right to the limit. And if someone made a film glorifying Nicholas Copernicus, Marie Curie, and Pope John Paul II, I don't think it would love poles as much as this film does. They've got a handful of them, and they're going to poke you in the eye with them just as often as they can. Every now and then you see something in a fairly restrained shot, like a really nice 3D view here of her in front of a pitchfork, but you know full well that you're going to see this thing again, and when you do, it's going to be thrust right out of the screen. And similarly, when you see somebody poking a fire, you can be pretty sure that it won't be long until that poker is shoved deep into negative space. And it's not just murder weapons, but things are thrown or held out towards the camera. She's offering us a joint here, or this fella's offering something a little more unsavoury. You could just about argue that some of this stuff is story relevant, but there are other shots that are just plain silly, like some kids playing with a baseball bat for no reason other than because it's an opportunity to thrust something out of the screen. Or maybe my favourite is this little mouse walking the plank a good long way out of the screen. And it gets even more ludicrous than this. We see her watching a TV here, and when you're thinking that the antenna is only poking a little way out of the screen, she kindly adjusts it to make sure that it's sticking out even further. Or why somebody playing with a yo-yo? I mean, it's presumably there as a sort of House of Wax homage, but it's utterly superfluous from a story point of view. One of my favourite 3D films is The Walk, and there's a scene in that where somebody's juggling. Maybe Robert Zemeckis' film is paying homage to Friday the 13th Part 3, but at least that movie was about an acrobat, whereas here it just feels like, who cares, it'll look fun in 3D, so let's just do it. Same goes for this guy making some popcorn. It's only there because it's a fun 3D effect. I mentioned before that we all have various ideas on what makes for good 3D, and certainly if good means in your face and gratuitous, then this is absolutely great 3D. Personally, I think it's daft fun, and it's enjoyably comical how far they push it. There was only one shot where I think they pushed it too far, and your brain couldn't hope to fuse the left and right eye view, and that was a snake doing a thankfully quite rare moment of extremely brief pop-out, where it was just too close to the camera to work. So for many people, this film is full of what they regard as the best type of 3D, extreme emergence into negative space, but for other people, it's the kind of thing that gave 3D a bad bad name. The modern digital era rarely offered up films using 3D like this one does, although a lot of the mainstream anti-3D critics still assumed that 3D meant the type of use as championed in Friday the 13th. Personally, I think it's frequently very silly and groan-inducing, but at the same time, it's a lot of fun, and it's not as if this is a serious film that's spoiled by contrived 3D shots, but rather it's one that's made more entertaining because of them. And like I said, I do think that this movie's 3D is generally excellent, even without those more exuberant moments. So just an extremely quick word about the film itself. I've got to confess, this sort of thing's not really my cup of tea. Oddly though, I'd also add that just about my favourite film of all time is about a serial killer who bumps off his victims in a variety of different and amusing ways. That film, however, Kind Hearts and Coronets, has a witty and literate script and characters that you care about and several great performances. This film, to me anyway, doesn't really have any of that. I honestly couldn't have cared less who lived and who died, and I had absolutely no idea why the killer wanted them all dead in the first place. Maybe I'd have been a lot more on board if I'd watched the first two films, but I have to admit I'm not that keen to. I do get the whole iconic Jason thing, and I know it's a much-loved series, and I'm all in favour of people loving films. It's just that, like I said, this isn't really my thing. On the other hand, this is exactly my thing because in spite of, and maybe partly because of, all of those ostentatious shots, this is something of a 3D classic. So I hope you found this in some way useful, and if so, I hope you'll join me again soon for a look at another 3D Blu-ray. Until then, thanks for looking on this one, cheers for now, bye bye.